The Pieces Lie Where They Fell by Evilhumour. Chapter 1. Xvital. With a chirp in her mouth, Xvital woke up in a very good mood. Hopping out of bed, she reached over with her tail to turn off the alarm clock she had obtained a while back. Letting out a mighty yawn as she stretched her arms behind her, she began to pack her belongings into her pack with her other hand. Shaking her head back and forth to try and rid herself of the last of the tiredness, she turned around to properly finish packing her stuff away, as well as do a short inventory check before she headed to stand in line to enter the upper. Currency, check. Papers, check. Notebooks, check. Long knife and knuckle busters, check. Other miscellaneous items, check. Good to go, she said to herself, a smirk breaking across her face as she slung her pack across her shoulders and fixed her belt around her waist with her other hand, dropping her left hand down to make it easier. Tightening the belt with her two hands, she fixed her short knife to her waist with her right hand. It was pointless extra security, as few ponies from Canterlot Middle or Upper would bother someone obviously from Quan Mitzel Kingdom, but it never hurt to be careful. Leaving the room she had rented for the night, Xvital made her way downstairs in quick time, with ponies moving out of her way, but keeping quiet about her appearance. Ponies this high in the middle liked to pretend they were upper citizens, and that meant being all polite and proper. Xvital let out a snort. The middle had the silliest of citizens, acting as if they were better than all those who lived in lower, or they were the elites that lived in the upper. How could they not know that the only real difference was the amount of direct threats presented it to you? It was beyond her, but it had amused her to see the middle ponies preen needlessly. Messed up that paragraph a bit. Using her rear hand to grab an apple from the basket on the inn counter while flicking a brass cadence to the mare that ran this inn and opening the door with her left, she flashed a toothy smile to the owner. "Thanks," she said, dipping her navy blue head and shaking her black hair behind her. She stepped into the early day. Towering over most of the middle inhabitants, barring the griffins and minotaurs, she began to whistle as she made her way to the West Gatehouse, where, while Xvital could have gotten a room in the northwest quarter and gone through one of the many gatehouses there, the morning sun would have been in her green eyes as she stood in queue to get into the upper, and screw that noise. Chewing her apple, she did her best to keep her head upright and avoid looking at the beggars lining the street, knowing that many would be brushed away for the honor festival tomorrow. But griffin, diamond dogs, minotaurs, and pony beggars would be pushed into the back alleys or down the mountain by guards at the very least. The changeling beggars were already antsy and careful of who they begged to for obvious reasons. Looking around, Xvital could spot several changelings moving youngerlings away into the hidden streets for their safety, knowing they'd be taking their lives in their own hands if they were seen tomorrow and the next few days. Pushing it away, as it wasn't her concern, she continued up the pathway to the Cadenzel Gatehouse and let out a groan at the already long line of ponies waiting to be passed through. Still, she had her trump card to get ahead. Herself. Looming tall over the line of ponies who were flinching and doing their best not to gawk at her, which she made worse as she tore into her apple a bit savagely, using her long tail to toss the core into the garbage bin and flashing her sharp teeth, she began a mental countdown as she waited for the guards to react. From her experience, she knew that they'd pull her out in 3, 2... "Excuse me," a guard in the ruby armor of the Cadenza guardhouse called out to her, narrowing his eyes and doing his best to look intimidating and in control of the situation, which she broke by turning her gaze to him and every pony seeing him jump a bit, You've been randomly selected for private screening. Please follow me. Picking up the tune from before. Oh, with a smirk on her face, she thanked the guard and refrained from making any smart comments, as they might actually screen her, instead of just pushing her along to not scare the ponies in the line. Picking up the tune from before, she followed the unicorn into the antechamber of the gatehouse, and walked over to the table to pull out a chair for herself with her third hand. "So," Vittel grinned as she sat down, "what do you need to ask me?" "What is your purpose in the upper, madam?" he asked, doing his best to remain calm despite his instincts that must have been screaming at him for her to run from her. "Research on different books of magical theory in the great library," she answered, which was true enough. "I see," he said, a notepad levitating in front of him in his salmon pink aura. "Length of visit?" "A couple of weeks, I suppose. It might take me some time to do my work." That was true from a certain point of view. "Name?" "Vittel," she answered, knowing that there was little chance that the equestrian government would reach out to the Quanmitzel kingdom, and using her real name would be fine. "And despite having no magic myself, I foresee your next question is, to what species am I? Yes?" She had placed a hand to her forehead in the classic psychic fortune-teller position, with the guard letting out an annoyed chuckle. "Actually, I know an Xvital when I see one," he snorted as he eyed her bag, no doubt trying to determine if it was worth his time to check it out properly. "Heh, you're one of the few in Canterlot that knew what I was." Vittel let out a bark of laughter. "Those in Lower thought I was some sort of monster or demon. That did it. Playing on the chance that this guard was a middle pony, and he'd be one of those that looked down on the lower ponies." With his own laughter, he said, "Those uneducated saps can't even recognize one of our nation's allies." The guard tossed the notepad into a pile of other notepads that had the signs above saying today's date. "Just pass through the bug detector light, and you'll be good to go." "Thank you, good sir," she said, standing upright and moving towards the door. Giving a cheeky smile to the protesting ponies in the line she had just jumped ahead of, she passed through the threshold with the magical lamp remaining inert, as she was no changeling. Moving into the straight and smooth cobblestone path streets, she looked at the broad buildings and statues of the first king of Equestria and the twin goddess princesses of old, running a hand over the statue of Blue Blood the Great, bowing to Celestia and Luna as he always claimed he was their regent until their return, and thus below them. She let out a sigh. She was finally here, in the upper of Canterlot. All she had to do now was find the great library, and she could move on to the next part of her plans. Oh dear, she had forgot to remember the path to the grand library. Face-palming, she reached into her pack and pulled out a map for the upper, and tried to decipher it to no avail. Maybe she could ask for help. It had been half an hour since she got into the upper, and she was so close to just going back to the gatehouse to ask for directions. Maybe Vittel was wrong to mock the middle ponies for pretending to be snooty upper ponies. It might have some validity, as no one would help her. Not even the beggars. Just one more try, and she was done being nice. "Excuse me, sir," she called out to a rather serious-looking Nox pony striding past her. He looked young, about her age if she was to gamble her money on it, and had a long sword tied to his barrel for easy draw. His coat was light gray, and mane was a dark silver color, with his talon emblem being a sword, which meant, Vittel realized, as the stallion had a signet ring on his right wing, he was a noble and more than likely prone to using that sword, while knowing he wouldn't get in trouble. In short, not the type she'd usually interact with. But she had already attracted his attention, and she decided to go all in. "I'm trying to find the Great Library. Do you know where it is?" He gave her a pointed look, the frown on his face tightening for a moment, before turning back to face the street he was walking down. After a few seconds, he said in a detached tone, "The Great Library is my destination as well. If you wish, you may follow me." "Oh!" A kind-ish noble brat that didn't scoff or stare at her. That was different. Blinking, she said, "Thank you, sir," as she moved to walk beside him. "You're the first to actually help me today, and this map is no help whatsoever," she said, tilting out the map to the stallion. He raised an eyebrow at her before holding out his wing to take the map from her, but not using his words to ask for it. Silently handing it over, his eyes roamed over it for a moment before handing it back. "That is due to you being sold a map of the Upper East, labeled the Upper West. Whoever sold you this did a disservice to you, or a serious misprint has occurred." "Oh, thank you," she said, smiling while kicking herself for such a rookie mistake. "I cannot believe I did this." "It is nothing. I have lived in the Upper West all my life, and at times I get lost myself," the stallion stated, turning sharply around the corner and not even looking at the changeling beggars he forced to press themselves against the buildings, with ponies from inside screaming at them to get away. "Heh," she let out a laugh, eyes roaming the landscape before looking at the stallion, who was frowning deeper now for some reason. "I mean it. Thank you for this. You're a nice guy." "I was just doing the proper thing, nothing more, miss," he said, although his frown seemed to flicker for a moment, as he led her through a short tunnel that had towering building on top of it that had a lot of flags hanging out the windows. "I'm Vittel," she said, introducing herself, holding out her tail hand to the stallion. "Lord Nightblade," he said, taking her hand with his wing and shaking it to exact properness a young noble should give to a common citizen, with his attention focused straight ahead. That meant he missed Vittel's face flush white for a moment, as she knew how important the Blade family was, but quickly pushed it away as it was not her concern. Stepping out of the tunnel, she saw a massive library, one of the great wonders of the world. It had a golden statue of the Magi of Stars, lined with priceless jewels that had magical alarms attached to them that would go off if somebody tried to steal them. Magi of Stars was the patron of knowledge and, according to legend, once a student to goddess Princess Celestia before surprising her and becoming the leader of the Virtuous Six. Even though Vittel thought most of Pony's mythology was bunk, she was still awed by the sight of this legendary pony and all the stories attached to her and the Virtuous Six. And she knew better than to mock the faith of a pony who had a sword and talent was swordplay. Walking up the grand and sparkling marble staircase, with ponies already sitting on the steps and talking about different topics, Vittel and Nightblade entered the high-ceiling entrance hall of the grand library, with stacks upon stacks of shelves of neatly placed books in the background, with ponies milling around on the ground and in the air. "I hope you are good enough to take care of yourself, Miss Vittel," Nightblade said, dipping his head politely, as decorum would call for. "If you need anything, you can inquire Matron Hush-Tone over there for advice." He tilted his head much more openly to an elderly-looking griffin standing behind the front desk, who smiled warmly at the stallion. "Excuse me, Matron Tone, but she is in her section at this time night, as you know full well." She clicked her beak at the stallion, who perked up before taking over into the air and into a direction deep in the library. Shaking her head and muttering soft things under her breath, the Griffin turned her focus on Vittle. "So, my dear, how can we help you expand your knowledge?" Vittle smiled and asked for directions to the Magical Theorems books so she could begin her work, with a mental checklist of the next 3 steps of what she needed to do already forming in her mind, and make herself a tidy profit. So, we finished Chapter 1. I have this suspicion Vittle is up to something illegal. No real shocker there, I'm sure. She seems very suspicious of a character. And I have my wonderings about Nightblade. Maybe he cares more than he would like to let on, and this society doesn't take nicely to that? Not sure. Anyway, there's the Magi of Stars bit. That was pretty clearly Twilight, but messed up a little through centuries of time passing. It's not the only story I've seen where they have that basic idea. It's always funny to look at the messed up version of history they get. Happens in real life, too. Anyway, that was Chapter 1. I hope to see you on Chapter 2. Hope you all have a wonderful time. Where's the pause button?